provide a tremendous amount of power for the energy crystal cannons and energy barrier. Although the defenders had managed to kill more than 100 of the invaders in just minutes, the former had spent energy crystals worth at least 1 million black crystal coins. To most small family clans, 1 million black crystal coins was an astronomical amount of wealth. Their revenues accumulated over a decade might not even come close to that number. Gilbert had been shouting and cursing, motivating the divine guards of the House of Han to continue replenishing the towers with fresh energy crystals. With that, the energy towers may continue to shine while powering the barrier that protected Fort Lasberg, as well as the energy crystal cannons that had not stopped bombarding the invaders. All these divine guards of the House of Han had gone through thorough interviews and interrogations before they were admitted. They had all passed background checks and were unusually talented. Most of them possessed mid-god strengths before they were recruited. On the first day they joined the House of Han, they were given the best divine weapons and divine armors that black crystal coins could buy. Then, they would be sent into the 8 Desolation and Torment formation for a round of tempering. After emerging from the formation, they would be personally trained by Balins and the others. These divine guards who had been trained and tempered possessed staunch minds and could remain calm under pressure, never dropping the ball during critical times. These people were much more efficient in refilling the energy crystals and operating the energy crystal cannons than the average divine guards in the City of Shadows. Those energy crystal cannons in Fort Lasberg did not just boast extreme firepower, but they also had a great firing range. Facing the bombardment of the energy crystal cannons, those divine guards of Hoffs were thrown into chaos. Many more were struck by the destructive beams and killed. Every blast launched from an energy crystal cannon would destroy a good fortune. Although there were just around 30 people in the fort refilling the energy crystals in the energy towers, they had managed to keep the hundreds of invaders led by Hoffs and Larrickson from breaching the fort. Scatter, Godamnit, don't you idiots know that those energy crystal cannons have great projectile range? Hoffs couldn't help but swear when more of his divine guards died. He instructed them to disperse even more. Larrickson and his high gods from the House of Broadhurst, meanwhile, used their divine energies to form barriers to protect themselves. Larrickson and his high gods were all prestigious characters in the city of Gorging Clouds, and they wouldn't evade from the annihilative beams like Hoffs and his followers. They deemed themselves too reputable and distinguished to do so. This left them with the only option of using the divine energy in their body to resist the energetic beams. The situation had entered a temporary stalemate. One party had lots of divine energies, while the other had tons of black crystal coins. But the former proved to be more enduring. The fierce attacks and strong defense meant that Fort Lasberg had to consume energy crystal rapidly. Despite having piled up a great number of energy crystals, in the end, they still ran out. "Lord Gilbert, we are almost out of energy crystals. What should we do?" asked one of the divine guards who was almost as irascible as Gilbert. "What can we do but retreat? Don't tell me what you want to charge at them and throw your lives away," replied Gilbert before he shouted at everyone, "Brothers, it's time. Let's leave this place while there is still some energy left in the energy towers." "Let's retreat to the Han residence," the divine guards said to each other. They filled the remaining energy crystals into the energy towers and rapidly withdrew to the Han residence. It was done smoothly and perfectly as though they had practiced it before. With all the energy crystals stuffed into the energy towers, it appeared like there was nothing valuable left on the fort. Gilbert and the divine guards vanished in an instant. Although they had left the energy towers, there was still energy left in the towers. The energy crystal cannons continued to shoot out destructive beams at those invaders. During that time, Hoffs lost yet another couple dozens of divine guards, while Larrickson and his experts exhausted a good amount of divine energy as they formed barriers to resist the destructive beams head-on instead of evading them. Gradually, the energy in those energy towers was depleted and the energy crystal cannons stopped firing. The invaders carefully listened and discovered that Fort Lasberg was pin-drop silent. "Go inside. There isn't a single soul in there," Larrickson calmly informed Hoffs after sensing for a moment. Hoffs, too, was able to detect the abnormality in the fort, but this time he was much more cautious. He randomly pointed at one of his followers and instructed, "Head inside and report back the situation." That divine guard secretly felt reluctant but did not reveal it at all. He nodded and flew towards Fort Lasberg. And when he got close, he flew over the defensive wall and cautiously descended into the fort. When he noticed that the invisible barrier had gone, he loudly cried, "The barrier has been depleted of energy. The energy towers are not shining, and nobody is here. Move!" Hofs commanded his divine guards fiercely, for he knew that there wouldn't be any more danger temporarily. The invaders transformed into streaks of shadows and descended on Fort Lasberg. Upon landing, Hofs and Larrickson immediately looked all around with glistening eyes, as though they were looking for something valuable. After scanning all around, Hofs cursed, "What in the world? There's nothing left. That fucking House of Han couldn't leave a single crystal for us." Larrickson, too, wore a dark face as he wasn't happy to have breached the fort. He groaned, "We have entered the fort. Now comes the easy part. Hee, don't you worry, Hofs. I'm certain that the Han residents at the center of the fort will have what you want. Let's get on with it." "I can wait no longer," Hofs coldly commanded his troops. "Move to the center of the fort and destroy the House of Han." Meanwhile, in the Han residence at the center of Fort Lasberg, a thick dark cloud came out of nowhere and lingered above the Han residence. The entire Fort Lasberg saw clear blue skies, but not the Han residence. After the dark cloud blanketed the Han residence, chilling winds started blowing while a mist slowly filled the residence and shrouded it from the view of outsiders. "Balins, Sanguis, have the demonic formations been activated?" asked Phoebe in a grave face. The Han family had gathered in a large meeting room on the highest floor of the largest building in the Han residence. "Yes, we have just double-checked it. They have all been activated," said Sanguis after nodding. His red eyes suddenly turned away and he took a deep breath. "Gilbert has returned. They should have completed their mission. It seems that Hofs and his troops will be here soon. Mr. Stratham, are there any civilians left in the fort?" Emily asked Stratham beside her, who had his brows bunched. Stratham replied with a smile, "They left long ago. There is no one in the fort other than the members of our family clan. I hope Wallace doesn't do anything to those civilians. They are going to spread the truth to the public. Wallace will soon be condemned by everyone," interrupted Iremike. "I finally understand why the City of Shadows ranks just a place above Hushville City. Hofs doesn't know how to hold his temper and Wallace can't tolerate having a competitor. They may be extraordinarily strong, but they aren't going to achieve shit with that attitude. Who cares about Wallace? As long as we survive this, we will leave the City of Shadows and look for Brian. I'm sure that Brian can lead our House of Han to a bright future," said Stratham with a relaxed smile. "Although I do not know Brian that much, I do know that he possesses infinite potential. In the near future, our House of Han will surely become stronger than the House of Saint. By then, we can come back here for revenge." Stratham had still underestimated Han Shuo's capability. By now, Han Shuo did not even need to get into action himself. Just the forces commanded by Han Hao would have easily crushed the House of Saint. "I'm back. Hoo, we have burned so many energy crystals. How my heart aches." It was at this moment that Gilbert returned with an expression of agony as though something tragic happened. "It's all right. As long as we can get the results that we want, we are not afraid of using up some crystal coins." Emily put on a faint smile and asked, "So how did it go, Dark Dragon?" "We have blasted down more than 200 of their divine guards," reported Gilbert with a sinister smile. "Many of those alive are wounded. Even Larrickson and his gang must have exhausted a good amount of divine energy." "Ha, brilliant job, Dark Dragon," said Sanguis. His eyes lit up with a red light as he claimed, "But I'm going to score even higher. Just wait and watch me slaughter the shit out of them." Chapter 880, Bait GDK 880. Bait Larrickson, Hofs, and the experts they brought assembled before the Han residence. Although they had been stalwart and zealous while marching to the residence, they were worried and hesitant when they were at their destination. A bizarre and eerie dark cloud loomed over the Han residence that was shrouded under a thick dark fog. None of the experts gathered outside could peer through the fog to see what danger may lie ahead. Having eaten tons of destructive blasts of energy crystal cannons, the divine guards of the Hushville City had learned to fear the House of Han. They dared not charge ahead recklessly. Even Hoffs and Larrickson immediately raised their hands, signaling their experts to halt upon seeing the peculiar situation ahead. They wore dark faces as they used their divine souls to probe the Han residents. After a long while, Hoffs softly exclaimed, "Something's wrong. My soul seems to be blocked by the thick fog. I cannot sense any life aura at all. This is impossible. I'm sure that they are inside. They must have blocked the sensing power of my soul somehow." Larrickson nodded and said, "Indeed, I too cannot sense any life aura, but I'm certain that those of the House of Han had never left Fort Lasberg. From my intel, they have been defending the fort all along. Those who left the fort were all civilians." Hoffs knew exactly where Larrickson's intel came from. He smirked as he said, "Wallace really is intolerant of competition. But this is a good thing, he. After eradicating the House of Han, I'm going to spread the truth to the public. If Brian is not dead already, he will know the role that Wallace played. By then, no matter if he was willing or not, he would have to fight alongside us. Indeed, Wallace may scheme, but so could we. We may be the ones doing the dirty work, but Wallace's hands are no less bloody than ours." Larrickson obviously didn't plan on letting Wallace play the role of an innocent bystander. He too had planned on dragging Wallace into the mud. "I did not expect that the House of Han would take so much trouble. Perhaps we need to be more cautious," said Hoffs gravely as he stared at the Han residence right ahead of him that was hidden under the thick, dark fog. "Let's try ranged attacks on it, the same way we treated the energy barrier earlier," proposed Larrickson. Hoffs nodded and commanded his troops, "Make some distance from the Han residence and start bombarding it. Let's see if they can hold up to even a single wave of our joint attack." Those divine guards of Hushville City did not hesitate. As their city lord commanded, they sent out a dazzling swarm of divine energies into the Han residence, hoping that it would reveal the situation under the fog. Hoffs and Larrickson had been observing attentively as the divine energy attacks fell into the dense fog. It was like a stone being thrown into the bottomless ocean. They did not hear any shrieks from any beings, nor did they hear the intense explosions that should have sounded. Something's not right. It was plain to all those gathered before the Han residence that the thick fog was nothing as simple as it seemed. They were startled and started thinking about how they should preserve their own lives. You, step inside and find the way in. It might just be a deceitful trick of the House of Han to keep us outside," instructed Hoffs as he randomly selected a few of his divine guards. Those Hushville City divine guards who were selected as cannon fodders felt terrified and wretched, but they carried out their city lord's command. Very slowly and cautiously, they stepped into the fog. They immediately noticed that their senses were greatly affected, with their eyes seeing no more than 10 meters. Stepping on the flat ground felt like stepping on air. Everything around them seemed unreal. Using their divine souls, Larrickson and Hoffs attentively observed the cannon fodders' movements. They were somewhat glad to find that the cannon fodders did not suffer ferocious attacks as they anticipated. However, they did not lose their guard and continued to observe the two's movements. The few cannon fodders gradually made their way deeper into the Han residence. They kept walking and walking, but did not see a single structure nor sense any life signs. They could find neither their way in nor their way out. Larrickson and Hoffs put on puzzled looks. They had been observing those cannon fodders move around through the aura of their divine souls, estimating their location and movement. The two discovered that those cannon fodders had been going around and around a small region. And no matter how many circles they walked, they ventured no further into the residence. Hoffs, given his temper, had long been screaming and cursing. However, it seemed as though those cannon fodders he sent couldn't hear him at all. They continued to go around and around the same area. They could go no deeper, nor could they find their way back. Soon enough, Hoffs got impatient. He selected a few more of his divine guards and instructed, "You lot, enter from another side. There might be a space-folding type of barrier, so be mindful. Don't be as useless as those boobies who can't even find their way back." "Don't worry, my lord. I cultivate the energy of space. If there is any space-edict barrier deployed in there, I can identify them and overcome them easily," assured one of the selected divine guards before taking the lead to step into the fog. Yet another bunch of cannon fodders attempted to intrude the Han residence. Once they crossed a certain distance, somehow, they would all start walking in circles as though they had lost their sense of direction. It was the same occurrence as the first batch of cannon fodders. Hofs knew that it was futile to send more cannon fodders into the Han residence. He turned to Larrickson and asked, "What do you think? They must have some sort of spacetic defensive barrier in there, and the expert who deployed it must have a profound level of mastery over the energy of space. Otherwise, your men wouldn't have been so clueless and be trapped," said Larrickson after thinking for a moment. And Hofs glanced at the experts Larrickson brought before he said in a deep, slightly annoyed voice, "Don't you think that it's about time you bunch make yourselves useful?" Although Larrickson and Hofs came sieging the fort together, only Hofs' divine guards had been put to the front line. Larrickson and his experts had mostly been just supervising. It was easy to see why Hofs wasn't so happy about it. Larrickson laughed mischievously, nodded, and said, "Very well." He turned and shot a glance at a high god of thunder standing behind him before instructing, "Kinnu, go give it a try. The energy of lightning can disrupt the edict of space. I believe that with enough bombardment of the lightning energy, those space energy barriers will be destroyed." The high god of thunder, named Kinnu, bowed at Larrickson. Without saying a word, he transformed into a bolt of thunder and shot into the fog. As he moved, thunder started to rumble while tiny electric sparks slithered among the dark cloud as the energy of lightning accumulated. In the Han residence, Ballins, wearing a scheming, cold face, commanded, "Activate the illusionary scene projector and bait them in." "I'll handle it. Hee, let's withdraw the mist for now and save that fella with the lightning energy some embarrassment," said Gilbert excitedly before he went on to flip the switches. Of all those in the meeting room, Ballins, Sanguis, and Gilbert were the only people familiar with the big and small demonic formations around the Han residence. Before Han Shu departed from the fort, he had described to them the powers of the demonic formations and how to use them. As all three of them cultivated demonic arts, with some of their knowledge overlapping with demonic formations, they were able to learn how to control the demonic formations. Sanguis, Gilbert, and Ballins went on with temporarily disabling some demonic formations and activating the illusionary scene projector. "Ladies, gentlemen, in just a moment, the mist will dissipate and the illusionary scene projector will clearly project our appearances before the attackers. At that time, please act as though you are so terrified that you shat your pants," instructed Sanguis as he set up the mechanisms. "We got it," replied Emily with a faint smile. After shooting into the mist, Kinnu activated the energy of lightning that he had been accumulating above him. Lightning bolts fell from the sky and bombarded every corner of the Han residence. Then, as though someone had flipped a switch, the thick fog that shrouded the Han residence suddenly started to dissipate. Even the dark cloud above the residence began to sway as though it might dissipate at any moment. Like a veil being lifted, the buildings in the Han residence were slowly revealed to the attackers. They saw the members of the House of Han looking terrified, helpless, and full of despair. Some gazed at the attackers foolishly, while others were frantically trying to flee. It was utter chaos. The lifelike scene and perfect acting had deceived all the attackers, especially Hofs, who had been waiting for the moment. They assumed that the High God of Thunder had managed to destroy all of the defensive boundaries in the Han residence, and they did not smell a rat. Hofs put on a savage smile and howled, "Charge. Kill them all." Chapter 881, Slaughterhouse GDK 881. Slaughterhouse Hofs and Larrickson thought that there was nothing in the Han residence that could harm them. They assumed that Kinnu's High God Thunderbolts had destroyed all the defenses after seeing that the residence was revealed. As the mist dissipated, the members of the House of Han were revealed. They seemed anxious and terrified. This was all the more evidence to Hofs and Larrickson that the House of Han had run out of tricks. If both Hofs and Larrickson, the strongest and most experienced experts in the army, could be fooled, then the rest of the army would be even more clueless. Therefore, on Hof's mark, all of Hushville City's divine guards and Larrickson's elite experts charged towards the Han residence that was unveiling from the mist. But this time, those on the front lines were not the divine guards from Hushville City, but they were Hofs, Larrickson, and those high gods that Larrickson brought. Unlike the previous battles, the strongest were at the very front. Perhaps the glistening wealth that the House of Han had accumulated all these years had blinded them. These experts had remained passive throughout the assault. But when the Han residents appeared defenseless, propelled by greed, they charged to the fore, wanting to loot all the wealth and resources that the House of Han had. The gang led by Hofs and Larrickson went into the Han residence in just an instant. Having the same objective, they flew towards the tallest and most magnificent building where Phoebe and the others were. "Ha ha ha, welcome to the slaughterhouse." Gilbert laughed maniacally before he shouted, "Reactivate the formations." Everywhere in the residence, beams of sinister purple-red lights suddenly lit up from the ground and shot towards the sky. It seemed as though a giant whirlpool of tremendous suction power was being generated. The mist that had dissipated reconverged in an instant. The Han residence was yet again shrouded by a thick mist. Simultaneously, chilling winds started blowing fiercely as ear-piercing shrieks spiked throughout the air. The Han residence was flooded with all sorts of sinister energies in an instant. The energies engulfed every living thing within range and allowed none to leave the giant meat grinder. Hofs instantly sensed that something was horribly wrong. "Oh shit, everyone retreat at once." His command, however, came too late. Most of the remaining Hushville City divine guards he brought had entered the Han residence. There were merely a dozen or so who were still outside the residence. They were the weakest of the army and therefore were pulled far behind by their comrades. Larrickson was stunned. The ferocious energies that were flooding the area made him feel threatened. He also realized that he had yet again fallen into his enemy's trap as though he was their puppet. It was a terrible feeling. Strange, eerie noises started playing in every region before bizarre energies suddenly started manifesting. The demonic formations had begun to operate. The hallucinating, corrosive, and soul-attacking effects erupted from those formations and firmly enveloped the trespassers. It was as though a giant meat grinder had been switched on. Bizarre columns of lights started flying all around, covering the formation like a giant spider web that could cut its attackers into chunks. At the center of the formations was the Han residence where the members of the House of Han were watching. From the top of the tallest structure, they could see the horrifying situation all around them. They were pleased to see the trespassers being shredded to pieces. The members of the House of Han were gathered in a meeting room where they could observe the deadliness of those demonic formations safely without being affected. Torn bodies, limbs, and organs could be seen splattering everywhere. They also saw the attackers make their final struggle and heard them shriek miserably as they perished. At this moment, all those valiant-looking divine guards of Hushville City seemed as weak as newborn infants. They were helpless against the myriad of attacks and energies they had never seen before. Resistance was futile. "Brilliant, just brilliant. That's what they deserve for intruding our Han residence," laughed Gilbert as he watched the bloodbath. He also explained the miraculous features of certain demonic formations to Strathome, Candide, and the others. Other than Ballins, Gilbert, and Sanguis, no one else in the room had any real understanding of the demonic formations deployed around the Han residence. Even Phoebe, Emily, and the others had no clue how to operate them. Before the demonic formations were activated, the members of the House of Han were feeling somewhat concerned, even though they had confidence in the defenses Han Shu deployed. But now, after having witnessed its destructiveness with their own eyes, they finally understood why Gilbert and Sanguis would be so optimistic. By then, Strathome, Iremike, Phoebe, and the others were so astonished that they were at a loss for words. They had yet again witnessed Han Shu's magic, and had considered Han Shu as a supernatural being who would always make miracles. They became even more convinced of Han Shu's invincibility. Although it's gratifying to watch them die, it's even more so to kill them with my own hands," said Sanguis with a malevolent grin before he suddenly leaped into one of the demonic formations and butchered the visitors with his broadsword glowing with blood-red radiance. After Sanguis, Bolland flew into the demonic formation without saying a word. Killing intent erupted from his body. A long, slender flying sword flashed and sliced one of the hallucinating divine guards into two. Strathome, Iremike, and the others were excited and they too wanted to join Sanguis and Ballins. But thankfully, Gilbert stopped them in time. "Don't go in there. The demonic formations can't tell friend from foe. It could kill you. Huh. Then why is it that Sanguis and Ballins are doing just fine there? Asked Phoebe with a brow raised. Before Master left, he taught the three of us how to traverse the demonic formations without being affected. It's very complicated, and one must not take a single wrong step. The two of them had memorized everything by heart. That's why they could walk around the formations without being affected. Then, Gilbert put on an embarrassed smile and said, "As for me, well, I couldn't remember all those steps and directions. That's why I'm not going down there, and neither should you all." Stratham, Emily, and the others stared blankly for a moment. After hearing the explanation, they looked at each other and gave up on entering the demonic formations. They had seen the horrifying conditions of their attackers. Even Larrickson and Hoffs were unable to escape from the demonic formations effects. They realized that they should not take unnecessary risks. Brian is truly amazing. Hundreds have died in the demonic formations. I guess we have nothing to worry about, remarked Phoebe smilingly. She finally seemed somewhat at ease. The party nodded and smiled after hearing her words, as though the formidable threat had already been neutralized. Do not lower your guard. The demonic formations are supported by Yuan energies and the demon general energy that Master placed before he left. Master had said that the demonic formations can't run indefinitely. After Sanguis and Ballins have enough fun, before the formations run out of energy, we will still have to evacuate, warned Gilbert. The party that was momentarily relaxed immediately returned to the tense mood. They understood the dire situation they were in. "Gilbert, how long can the formation last?" asked Stratham with his brows bunched. "That's hard to say. It depends on how rapidly the Yuan energy is being consumed. But anyway, the demonic formation has a limited amount of energy and will stop running once it's exhausted. We need to leave before it runs out of juice, while Hoffs and Larrickson are still trapped. The sooner we leave, the better." Gilbert suddenly sighed and mumbled, "Hell, how I wish Master was here. Then all of those motherfuckers would be fucking dead." Sigh. "Then we have no time to waste. Gilbert, inform Sanguis and Ballins that once we have gathered everyone, we will immediately activate the airship and leave Fort Lasberg," commanded Emily gravely. "Don't worry, Sanguis and Ballins know that we need to leave," said Gilbert as he nodded. Emily, Phoebe, Stratham, and the others then hastily issued commands, gathering everyone at a secret underground chamber beneath the building. Multiple shadows shot around the building and entered every room, assembling every divine guard of the House of Han at the secret chamber, which was connected to an evacuation tunnel. Meanwhile, Sanguis and Ballins traversed across various regions of the demonic formation. They avoided Larrickson, Hoffs, and the other high gods, and slaughtered those attackers who possessed merely mid-god strengths. Sanguis and Ballins looked ferocious as they were drenched in their enemy's blood. They were enjoying the killing spree. When the two were about to lose themselves, Gilbert shouted at them from the building, "Sanguis, old guy, it's time to leave." The two soon regained their rationality and flew back into the building. They then went to the underground tunnel with Gilbert. Chapter 882, Coincidence? GDK 882. Coincidence? Even though the members of the House of Han had all evacuated the Han residence, the demonic formations surrounding the residence remained operational. Every once in a while, dying shrieks of agony and helplessness would play from the demonic formations. Larrickson and Hoffs were both trapped in a formation that attacked them psychologically. When their worst fears struck their minds, they would have to use every bit of their willpower to resist. In such a situation where their divine souls were under constant attack, Larrickson and Hoffs had no extra time to even find out what was happening to their underlings. They put all their focus on resisting their worst nightmares. Having reached the late-stage high god realm in their cultivations, both Hoffs and Larrickson had minds much more tenacious than that of an average god. They had been able to resist the onslaught of their worst nightmares, albeit barely. Meanwhile, those mid-gods around them with weak minds were driven to insanity. They were unable to resist the psychological attacks and ended up killing themselves. Time flew. A few days passed without a moment's notice. The Yuan energies in the Han residence were nearing exhaustion, and the demonic formations weakened before shutting down one after another. A number of fatigued Hushville City divine guards re-emerged from the formations. They were just inches from death, but survived by mere luck. Gradually, the Yuan energies were completely exhausted. The power source for those demonic formations around the Han residence was finally all used up. The thick mist that shrouded the Han residence had vanished long before that. Every region and structure in the Han residence was laid bare under the bright sun. Those buildings were surrounded by towering stelae and plants, which were covered with people who had died under horrifying circumstances. They were Hoff's divine guards from Hushville City. Some were without limbs or heads, or were deformed or twisted beyond their natural range of motion. Some bled from every orifice, and their bodies looked as though they had been freeze-dried. There were 1,000 Hushville City divine guards that came to assault Fort Lasberg, but by now, less than 300 were left. Moreover, those 300 who luckily survived were all tired and drained of energy. Hoffs took a moment to process the scene of utter devastation around him. A mixed feeling of sadness and rage swelled from his heart. This was definitely not the outcome that Hoffs desired. Feeling completely lost and helpless, his mind was vacant, and he did not think of pursuing his targets. Those divine guards from Hushville City, who were incredibly lucky to survive, seemed as though they were bordering on insanity. Their eyes were hollow with fear and horror. At the moment, they were all huddled closely together and trying their best to recover some divine energy. Larrickson was very astonished. He did not expect that those bizarre energies would kill so many of Hoff's men. However, Larrickson did not feel the least bit of sadness because none of his high gods had been killed. Kinnu, go with your men and search around. See if those from the House of Han are still inside. Larrickson kept silent for a moment before he commanded in a cold voice while winking at Kinnu. Kinnu had served Larrickson for a long time and could decipher Larrickson's actual instruction. He nodded knowingly and immediately began executing the command. They started flying towards the tall and large buildings and began a thorough search. With the strength that Larrickson possessed, after the demonic formation stopped functioning, he could instantly sense that there was no one in the Han residence except themselves. His real goal wasn't to look for any remaining members of the Han family, but for any remaining treasures. Hoffs, still drowning in grief and pain, came to his senses upon hearing Larrickson's command to his underlings. He knew what Larrickson was up to. Suppressing the anger in his heart, he shouted, "Search the residence, kill anyone you see, and bring everything valuable back here." Those exhausted Hushville City divine guards immediately got up to execute Hoff's command with frowns. They flew all around the Han residence at high speed like a swarm of bees around their nest. 10 minutes later, Kinnu and those Hushville City divine guards returned with disheartened faces. It was obvious that they had come back empty-handed. My lord, not a single person, energy crystal, nor black crystal coin was left. Those damn members of the Han family took everything with them, reported Kinnu upon returning to Larrickson. Phoebe and the others had started moving their assets since receiving intel that Larrickson and Hoffs were going to attack them. It was obvious that they wouldn't leave the two with a single valuable item. By now, the only valuable item left in the Han residence was the demonic formation that had run out of energy. Unfortunately for Larrickson and Hoffs, they did not know how to utilize demonic formations. Even if they relocated everything in the Han residence, they would never be able to use it as a defense. One man's treasure could be another man's trash. To Han Shuo, Sanguis, and Ballins, who were well-versed in demonic arts, the materials in those demonic formations were very useful. But to Hoffs and Larrickson, those items were completely useless. They couldn't have gone far. HMPH, I'm sure that Wallace must have deployed his forces as well. Those fuckers won't be able to leave the City of Shadows that easily. Larrickson coldly groaned and continued, they must be running for the Death Dominion. After them, with so many of his troops now dead, giving up was no longer an option for Hoffs. Even if not for himself, he had to murder every last one of the House of Han as justification for the remainder of his divine guards. Besides, those of the House of Han could be escaping with a mountain of black crystal coins. Hoffs would never let Larrickson enjoy the wealth alone. Although many of his troops had perished, Hoffs was still confident that he could defeat the House of Han. There were still many high gods on his team, while there wasn't a single high god expert in the House of Han. Hoffs was certain that if he could force the House of Han to fight square on, he could claim victory with just those few high god in his team. "Pursue them," Hofs commanded his troops. The attackers who had suffered great losses in Fort Lasberg went on another march, rushing in the direction of the Death Dominion. Inside a bottomless valley a great distance from Fort Lasberg, Ralph was wearing a dark face as he waited for the latest scouting information. A shadow shot across the sky before it stopped in front of Ralph. He knelt on one knee and respectfully reported, "My lord, I have received intel. Those of the House of Han are indeed heading for us." Ralph was elated. He put on a cold grin and said, "Excellent, our waiting here has not been in vain." After taking a short pause, Larrickson asked, "Right, what's the situation like over in Fort Lasberg?" With Larrickson and Hofs attacking the fort, even if the Han family has managed to escape, they should have suffered great casualties, right? The man shook his head and replied, "We do not know the exact situation in Fort Lasberg. Before Larrickson and Hofs came, all the civilians were forced to leave the fort. We have tried inserting some scouts, but they could not enter the fort. They only heard the tremendous rumbles from those energy crystal cannons." "Hee, that is wonderful. The House of Han seems to have gone all out to resist." Ralph put on an evil grin and continued, "But against 1,000 Hushville City divine guards and a large number of high gods, even if the House of Han wasn't exterminated, I reckon there would only be a few who have managed to escape. Your lordship is indeed the wisest. I believe that those riches the House of Han has gathered all these years must be on those escaping few," flattered the divine guard. "It is the city lord who is wise." Ralph praised Wallace respectfully before he instructed in a cold, evil voice, "Get ready, block in the path of their airship, intercept them, exterminate the remainder of them. We are going to shift all the blame onto Hofs and Larrickson. By then, even if Brian returns, he will only go after the two while we will stay clean." Larrickson understood that his troops were still shocked by Han Shuo from the last competition between the 7 Divine Guard Corps. Even though Han Shuo had disappeared for a few years, they were still afraid of Han Shuo. Ralph had said so to puff up his Divine Guard's confidence so that they wouldn't be constantly worrying about the consequences when butchering the members of the House of Han. And it seemed that Ralph's method was very effective. His Divine Guards seemed energized and motivated after hearing that they wouldn't have to suffer any consequences or worry about Han Shuo seeking them for revenge. While Ralph and his Divine Guards were getting into position for an ambush, Phoebe and the others on the airship were on high alert, constantly monitoring their environment as they traveled. While leaving the City of Shadows, they tried their best to avoid the civilians and other beings. They were worried about running into bandits. "There are people gathered in the valley ahead," exclaimed Sanguis suddenly before he explained, "I can sense the flow of their blood. They are all very excited. It seems that they are targeting us." "Go around them," commanded Emily decisively. She said, "We need to leave the city as soon as possible. We don't have time to engage them." "But they wouldn't let us," Sanguis frowned. "They are approaching us already. It must be us that they are after. I wonder which side they are affiliated with." "Although the airship saves us energy, it has limited speed. Running from them is not an option," said Stratham rather gravely. "Get ready for battle. Disembark from the airship and get into battle position," commanded Phoebe and Emily simultaneously. A swarm of figures flew down from the Titanic airship. The 700 or so troops arranged themselves methodically. Divine weapons were drawn as they waited for the arrival of their enemy. All 700 of the Divine Guards had been very carefully filtered before admission. Having been tempered in the Hellish 8 Desolation and Torment Formation, and trained by Ballins in the mountain ranges nearby Fort Lasberg, these Divine Guards were not just deadly, but also mentally tenacious. They did not feel the slightest fear as they waited for the unknown enemy. Phoebe, Emily, Ballins, Sanguis, G. Ilbert, and Stratham were at the front for the troops. They felt a sense of pride when they turned around and saw how dauntless these elite guards of the House of Han were. They also held great confidence in the capabilities of their troops. A few minutes later, the Second Corps Divine Guards led by Ralph gradually revealed themselves from the front of the Han family. Ralph had brought the majority of his Second Corps Divine Guards. 600 or 700 of them marched into appearance in a tight, dense formation. Ralph wore a cold face and glared at Phoebe and the others with hostile eyes. He asked in a strange manner, "Ladies, gentlemen, where are you all going? What are you up to, bringing such a grand party?" "You!" shouted Phoebe accusingly. She did not anticipate that it would be Ralph blocking them from leaving. It appeared that Wallace had not just tacitly approved of Larrickson and Hoffs attacking Fort Lasberg, but he had also sent Ralph to make sure that they succeeded. "This is the territory of the City of Shadows, and your House of Han are citizens of our city. I wonder what you all could be up to, bringing every member of the House of Han towards the Death Dominion." Ralph seemed to have thought of some excuses ahead of time. He sneered, "Could it be that your people are going to betray the City of Shadows? It must be so, but fortunately I happened to run into you. Otherwise, I wonder how greatly you would have harmed the City of Shadows." "Happened to run into us? Ha ha ha, what a joke," Stratham said mockingly. "So it's mere coincidence that you have come to this remote, desolate mountain area thousands of miles away with most of your Second Corps Divine Guards at the right time and placed to block our way. You call that a coincidence? Ha, yeah, right." Ralph knew the excuse was lousy, but he did not care. He coldly groaned and continued with his speech. "However, I will give you the benefit of the doubt and won't make things difficult for you. Turn around now and return to Fort Lasberg. I will immediately inform Lord Wallace of the incident. His lordship will investigate the matter thoroughly and hand you a fair judgment." Ralph took a short pause before he continued in a cold, threatening voice. "But if you insist on leaving the City of Shadows, don't blame me for doing my job." Wallace. Is there even any integrity left in him? Phoebe was usually an outspoken person, and she did not have the patience to continue the charade with Ralph. "Don't fucking act righteous and noble in front of me. I know that Wallace has sent you here to kill us, but let me tell you, we are not returning to the fort to die. How dare you speak so rudely of the city lord? It only shows how determined you are to betray the City of Shadows." Ralph gestured and commanded his troops, "Leave none of these traitors alive. Kill them all." Phoebe and the others knew Ralph's purpose the moment that he appeared. He had no intention of letting those of the House of Han live right from the start. "You think you can defeat us, Ralph?" Sanguis could no longer hold back his anger. His eyes glowed red as he said, "My master may not be here, but I can defeat you just as simply." Upon finishing those words, Sanguis charged at Ralph. A mist of blood spread out from Sanguis' body, while the broadsword made of blood crystal glowed in his hand. His momentum soared as he flew towards Ralph like a blood-red meteor. Ralph, who had come here with confidence, suddenly froze. He had long scouted out the strength of the House of Han. The only true experts were Hanshu and Rose, and both of them had disappeared a few years before. Without them, there wasn't a single high god in the House of Han. It was for this reason that Ralph was so confident that he could intercept the House of Han with his troops. However, when Sanguis started flying towards Ralph, he was shocked. He suddenly detected that the intense blood aura on Sanguis contained an extreme amount of energy. Ralph felt a sense of threat from this sinister, bloodthirsty aura. It was obvious to him that this energy was greater than that of a Midgod. Although Sanguis, Ballins, and Gilbert could only defeat Midgods a few years ago, the three had made breakthroughs since then, and they now possessed the strength to fight the High Gods in this universe. Sanguis, Ballins, and Gilbert had to abandon Fort Lasberg because both Larrickson and Hoffs possessed late-stage High God strengths, and Larrickson had a few High Gods with him. This force was much greater than the three. There was no way that they could defeat so many High Gods with their current strengths. Ralph, however, was just a mid-stage High God. Sanguis could put up a fight against an expert on that level. "Lock, Walter, I will handle this kid. You guys will handle the rest," shouted Ralph before he charged at Sanguis, who was emanating a formidable aura. Lest Ralph fail in the covert mission, Wallace had temporarily placed 2 early-stage High Gods under Ralph's command. The 2 were Wallace's trusted aides that he kept secret from the public for missions like this. He wanted to make it absolutely certain that the House of Han was exterminated and nobody would suspect him. Following Ralph's command, 2 experts emerged from those Second Corps Divine Guards. One cultivated the energy of darkness, while the other cultivated the energy of earth. They were both early-stage High Gods. Ballins and Gilbert exchanged glances and shot forward simultaneously to intercept the 2 trusted aides of Wallace. Although Ballins and Gilbert were not improving as rapidly as Sanguis was, they still made breakthroughs at a much faster rate than Phoebe and the others. Against 2 experts who had just entered early-stage High God realms, Bollins and Gilbert were able to put up a fight, albeit with difficulty. Defenders of the House of Han, march forth. Show them who are the strongest guards, commanded Phoebe. The number of divine guards Ralph brought was around the same number as that possessed by the House of Han, but this didn't mean that they were evenly matched. The House of Han had demonstrated in the last competition between the 7 Divine Guard Corps that they were the strongest in team combat strength. Those Divine Guards had been trained for just 1 year when they defeated the elite troops of the Second Corps. The House of Han Divine Guards now had been trained for many more years in the 8 Desolation and Torment formation. The Second Corps had no chance then, and even less now. Chapter 883, An Unstoppable Army, Chapter 883, An Unstoppable Army Translator. Hedonist Editor. Emily, the guards of the House of Han, charged at Ralph's Second Corps, divine guards like an unstoppable spear. But as they charged, they maintained formation, perfectly organized, moving in perfect unison. While charging at Ralph's army, these divine guards of the House of Han looked after one another with great rapport. The demonic combat formation they used when marching at their enemy maximized their firepower potential and allowed them to break apart their enemy in the most effective way. The divine guards of the House of Han wore emotionless faces as they calmly coordinated themselves with their teammates. Every step they made was of millimeter precision. If one was to observe from above, one would see that every guard in a squadron was at an equal distance from each other. The squadrons were also well coordinated with each other, as though each squadron was an individual in a bigger group. Those guards with great strength and the ability to make formidable attacks stood up front, acting at the edge of the spear. Meanwhile, those with more ordinary abilities but cultivated the energy of water or earth energies with great defensive power would stand in the middle. Their job was to deploy layers of boundaries to defend against their enemies' attacks. The individual strengths of these House of Han guards weren't substantially greater than those of the Second Corps Divine Guards. However, when they worked together as a team, when every individual's potential was utilized to the fullest, they could unleash an exponentially greater amount of power and become far more formidable than the Second Corps Divine Guards. Seeing the House of Han guards charging at them, those Second Corps Divine Guards immediately employed defensive measures. Their leaders, Ralph, Locke, and Walter, were occupied with Sanguis, Bollins, and Gilbert. Without the 3 high gods to take the brunt for them, intimidated by the House of Han guards, they employed defensive measures without thinking. Though they had made the right choice, it was still not enough. As soon as the conical-shaped formation made contact, the defensive wall that the Second Corps Divine Guards formed in haste immediately crumbled as though made of paper. Right after that, the House of Han guards shot into the gap between those Second Corps Divine Guards. The squadrons and companies spread out like inflating balloons before quickly reaping the lives of those Divine Guards nearest to them. When the Second Corps Divine Guards launched attacks on the House of Han guards, they would be handled by those guards who specialized in neutralizing incoming threats. Meanwhile, those guards in charge of attacking could completely ignore their enemies' counterattacks, allowing them to focus on what they did best. With that, even though the 2 clashing forces had around the same number of troops, the 2 sides were not being ground down at an equal rate. The attacks that the Second Corps Divine Guards made were mostly ineffective, which would cause only some light injuries at most. Meanwhile, the attacks that the House of Han guards made would often cause severe injuries, if not death. The fatal flaw of those Second Corps Divine Guards was immediately exposed. It was obvious that they lacked rapport and did not know to cooperate. When facing an attack, they were typically only focused on preserving their own lives, which would lower the frequency and deadliness of their attacks. Those Divine Guards were also very selfish. Not only did they not give a shit about the lives of their comrades, but they would also sacrifice their injured teammates just to keep themselves unharmed. The gap of strength between the 2 forces was revealed as soon as they clashed, and it only grew larger as time went by. Most of the miserable shrieks came from the Second Corps Divine Guards. More than 100 died from the bombardment from the House of Han guards in just moments, during which the House of Han suffered just 2 casualties and a dozen or so injuries. Having been taught to fight in demonic combat formations, the House of Han guards knew how to work together to maximize their firepower and defensive power. They had way surpassed the Second Corps Divine Guards in cooperativeness and team cohesion. In large-scale combat like this, the House of Han had an absolute upper hand as they mowed down those Second Corps Divine Guards. Ralph had been rather passive since the start of his battle with Sanguis, and he found himself rather helpless against the ferocious bombardment of bloody radiances. He did not expect Sanguis to possess such formidable strength and to be so damn ferocious. Ralph could not feel more remorseful as the miserable shrieks of his troops played over and over in his ears. He had not just underestimated Sanguis, Ballin's, and Gilbert's strengths. He had severely misjudged the situation. He did not expect to find that not only had those refugees escaping from Fort Lasberg not suffered any casualties, but they were still bursting with energy and at the top of their game. I fucking hell, did Hoffs and Larrickson even invade the fort? How is it that two late-stage High God experts with so many High Gods and Divine Guards have not been able to leave the slightest scratch on the House of Han? What the fuck happened? /I cursed Ralph internally as he watched his Divine Guards being slaughtered. Before Ralph was Sanguis, staring fixedly at him with his blood-red eyes. A broadsword giving off the reeking of blood whooshed past him and caused the blood in his body to rush chaotically. Ralph was confident that he could eventually defeat Sanguis. He realized that Sanguis was only barely able to stay on top by relying on the bizarreness of the energy he cultivated. Based on Ralph's assessment, Sanguis was overdrawing his energy, and he wouldn't be able to keep it up for too long. Sanguis would soon be exhausted, and he only needed to defend himself until that moment. But Ralph also knew that if he kept on waiting, more and more of his Divine Guards would perish. The only other option was to risk his life and go on an all-out fight against Sanguis, which he himself would suffer greatly for, even if he could defeat Sanguis. Ralph had been passively waiting because he would rather let his subordinates die than risk injuring himself. As Ralph silently defended against Sanguis' ferocious attacks, he found the time to observe Locke and Walter. He had high hopes for the two experts sent by Wallace, but he soon realized that his hope was misplaced. Locke and Walter, the two trusted aides of Wallace, were also being passively bombarded by their opponents. In fact, Locke and Walter were in a worrying situation. Against the ferocious attacks of Ballins and Gilbert, the two High God experts were candlelights in a storm. They could be extinguished at any moment. What the fuck? No wonder the House of Han won the last time. No High God my ass, what a liar. /I cursed Ralph in his mind. He had no idea that Sanguis, Ballins, and Gilbert in fact were not High Gods during the competition, and that they had simply soared in the little time since. He thought that the Fifth Corps defeated his Second Corps because Sanguis, Gilbert, and Ballins were too powerful. We can't keep going on this path. Otherwise, we would all be finished. After reevaluating the situation, Ralph finally stopped being so passive in the battle. He finally put his life on the line and went on an all-out fight against Sanguis. When Ralph stopped being overly cautious and stopped being so reserved, his strength substantially improved. While spending divine energy to stabilize his blood, he fought Sanguis without a care about getting hurt. With that, Sanguis no longer had the upper hand. Against a mid-stage High God going all in, Sanguis had no choice but to strive even harder. He had gained many more fresh wounds in just moments. But somehow, when his blood escaped from those wounds, Sanguis felt that the blood in his body had become even more energetic while his broadsword glowed even brighter. His firepower was increasing. In just a matter of minutes, more than 300 Second Corps Divine Guards were slaughtered by the House of Han Guards, with the latter suffering just 3 additional casualties and around 20 injuries. "Kill them all, stop at nothing," commanded Phoebe coldly from behind the House of Han Guards. She could tell that Sanguis, Ballins, and Gilbert were overdrawing their energies and they wouldn't last long. She realized that the House of Han Guards had to destroy the Second Corps Divine Guards as quickly as possible and assist the 3. The House of Han Guards promptly changed their combat formation. From a conical-shaped formation, they turned into daggers stacked like a flower. The 700 of them divided into 7 groups and shot out like 7 daggers, slaughtering those panic-stricken Second Corps Divine Guards. It was soon evident that this formation was even deadlier than the previous. When the 7 daggers dispersed, They turned the Second Corps divine guards into 7 rivers of blood. Ralph was frightened. Ralph suddenly realized that at this rate, even if he managed to kill Sanguis, he wouldn't have any troops left by then. He calmly reevaluated the situation for a moment before he suddenly shrieked. Mission failed. Everyone retreat. Ralph stopped attacking Sanguis and flew away. Locke and Walter, too, immediately broke off from Ballins and Gilbert and flew towards the valley nearby. The Second Corps divine guards, who had received the command to retreat, started fleeing frantically. Their hearts were filled with dread. They did not expect to fare so poorly against an army of similar size, that they would be so fragile from start to finish. When Ralph and his Second Corps divine guards started fleeing, the House of Hand guards very calmly pursued them. They wished to cause even greater casualties and maximize the damage to Ralph's Second Corps. "Do not pursue," shouted Stratham hastily. "Get back here, we cannot afford to waste any more time on them," commanded Phoebe calmly. Both Stratham and Phoebe understood that Larrickson and Hoffs wouldn't have given up so easily. They might have started pursuing them by now. If Hoffs, Larrickson, and his experts caught up to them, this time, there wouldn't be any demonic formation that they could hide behind. It was crucial for them to make full use of every second of every minute. They simply had no time to waste on Ralph and his gang. Besides, it wouldn't be too late to kill Ralph along with Wallace later in the future when they had the capacity to return to the City of Shadows. They knew that Ralph was no longer a threat to them, and they could always take his life in the future. Upon hearing Stratham and Phoebe's command, the House of Hand guards rapidly flew back to them. They reassumed a defensive formation around Phoebe and Stratham. "Sanguis, Gilbert, are you all right?" cried Emily suddenly. The crowd immediately turned their gazes towards Sanguis, Ballins, and Gilbert. After the great battle, all 3 of them were panting heavily and drenched in sweat. It was obvious that they had exhausted a great amount of energy. This was especially the case with Sanguis. Although he seemed as though he was supported by the inexhaustible willpower of a warrior, the moment that Ralph left, he turned pale and his blood-stained body collapsed. It was after Sanguis had the time to relax that he realized he had exhausted too much energy in the battle. "Sanguis, you okay?" asked Gilbert concernedly. Although he too was sweating profusely, he still looked quite healthy, unlike Sanguis. "I will be fine in a moment," said Sanguis after he forced a smile. The broadsword in his hand suddenly flew up, hovered in the sky, and started spinning at high speed. Strands of bizarre energy emanated from Sanguis' broadsword. Suddenly, the blood spilled by the perished Second Corps divine guards seemed as though it was drawn by some sort of energy. They transformed into mist, flew into the air, and gathered around the broadswords. The mist slowly condensed into streams of blood and spun on the surface of the sword. Gradually, every drop of blood on the ground had condensed on the broadsword, and the reeking scent faded. The broadsword returned to Sanguis' hand before streams of red radiances flowed from the broadsword into Sanguis' body. Moments later, Sanguis was no longer pale, and his eyes no longer tired. He seemed recharged and as energetic as usual. Sanguis took a deep breath and smilingly announced, "All right, I'm good. Come, let's hurry on." Stratham, Iremike, Phoebe, and the House of Hand guards were all dumbstruck by what they saw. They did not expect that Sanguis, who couldn't even stand just a moment ago, could regain his energy just like that. It was simply unimaginable to them. "PFF, that's nothing to be shocked about. Our master's energy is nothing that you can understand. Sanguis is my master's disciple. It's quite normal that he can recover so quickly." When Gilbert saw that everyone was in a daze, he hastened, "Get a move on already. Don't tell me that you want those guys to catch up?" The crowd came to their senses after hearing those words. They hastily re-embarked on the airship and continued their journey to the Death Dominion. Chapter 884, Do you know him? Chapter 884, Do you know him? Translator, Hedonist Editor, Emily GDK 884, Do you know him? Over at the Shared Border, or the Darkness and Death Dominions, the Ronson Canyon. The Ronson Canyon was a massive canyon that all those who wished to travel between the Death and Darkness Dominions must traverse. The canyon was plagued by god-hunters. It was said that the most powerful god-hunter clans in the Death and Darkness Dominions had their base camps set up in the Ronson Canyon. Merchant caravans would only step into the canyon with a large group of divine guards. but the Ronson Canyon had recently become much safer than usual. It was said that one of the most powerful God Hunter factions had left the canyon for some reason, and after they vanished from the canyon, the remaining God Hunter factions turned quiet and stopped wreaking havoc over the lands. On that day, a massive airship transporting a great army flew into the vast territory of the Ronson Canyon. It was like a large cloud overshadowing the land. Human silhouettes could be seen on the airship. They were divine guards vigilantly scanning their surroundings, watching out for any enemy who might suddenly emerge from the thick jungle. We have finally reached the Ronson Canyon. After crossing the canyon, we will be in the territory of the Death Dominion. Hofs and Larixon will never step into the Death Dominion with their army uninvited. Our allies from the Death Dominion will be there to welcome us, said Stratham after he heaved a sigh of relief. He had been feeling nervous and uneasy throughout the journey, worrying that Larixon and Hofs could catch up at any moment. We cannot relax just yet. This is the intersection point of the Darkness and Death Dominions. God Hunters run wild here. Ballins had worked in Erebus Third Corps for a few years, and he had heard a thing or two about the Ronson Canyon. He knew that the canyon housed a good number of formidable God Hunter factions. God Hunters? G. Ilbert put on a disdained smirk and remarked, with the force that our House of Hand now possesses, they should be afraid of us instead of the other way round. They'd better not provoke us, otherwise we will fulfill their death wish. Don't you boast, Ballins glared at Gilbert and rebutted. If we run into just one of those factions, then sure, we have nothing to worry about. But if we run into a so-called alliance of multiple God Hunter factions, we will be in deep trouble. After taking a short pause, Ballins continued gravely, there is one God Hunter faction in the Ronson Canyon that is particularly savage. They are the most infamous God Hunter faction in the canyon, but few know the identity of their leader. They would attack every caravan that travels through the canyon, even one that is protected by a large number of divine guards. The cities of the Darkness Dominion had tried to annihilate them, but they had always failed. They have been unrivaled in the Ronson Canyon for decades. No average family clan could contend against them. Gilbert frowned, ceasing his cheeky behavior. Who is their leader? That's frightening, Ballins answered. As I've said, only a few know the identity of their leader. Perhaps only those in the business of God hunting. But according to hearsay, the person is very young. He might just be a teenager. He cultivates in the energy of death and uses a bone spear. What a terrifying youngster. I wonder if he or Sanguis is stronger, muttered Gilbert as he took a glance at the teenager beside him. Even if Sanguis has his strength, he doesn't have his leadership skills, said Ballins. How could you be sure about that? Hee, now you've made me curious, I feel like meeting that guy. Sangui's strength had recently been soaring, and he had grown more arrogant. He did not think that there could be another teenager that could match himself. We better pray that we don't run into him. Otherwise, we might not even be able to leave the Ronson Canyon, said Ballins. Everyone be watchful. Larixon and Hofs won't give up on us so easily. The Ronson Canyon may be vast, but we cannot linger in this area. We ought to leave as quickly as possible, said Emily. The only thing in her mind was to bring the members of the House of Hand to safety. Behind an awe-inspiring waterfall in the Ronson Canyon were dozens of big and small caves where figures could be seen moving about. The largest chamber was well lit and supported by 3 miniature energy towers. Dozens of savage-looking God Hunter leaders were having a discussion in the chamber. I have completed my investigation. They are the city of Shadow's House of Han. The Celestial Pearl Pharmacy found all over the Death, Destruction, and Darkness Dominions is owned by this family clan, explained Quincy, a leader of a God Hunter faction, beaming with joy. He tempted the other God Hunter leaders. The Celestial Pearl is filthy rich. They are a big, fat cash cow. Plus, those guards of the House of Han cultivate all sorts of elements and edicts. We will get not just a large amount of black crystal coins, but also a large amount of their divine energy. So, who's in? The power that the House of Han displayed was nothing feeble. None of the God Hunter factions could take down the family clan by themselves. All the God Hunter leaders in the Ronson Canyon had assembled in the cave to discuss if they should join forces to raid the House of Han. Sounds like a great deal? Chrisen, another God Hunter leader, said with a savage smile, The House of Han was in a dire situation when they left the City of Shadows. If we join forces, we can easily overpower them. Hee, I'm in. Me too. Count me in as well. We want some too. Those Godhunter leaders gathered in the chamber intended to join forces to defeat the House of Han. Under Quincy's instigation, the strongest Godhunter factions in the Ronson Canyon agreed to join forces, marking the House of Han as their prey. You boys seem to have forgotten someone, a dissenting voice suddenly sounded. Scarlet, one of the Godhunter leaders, knitted her brows as she said, "His surname, Han, it's a rare family name. Don't you think it's possible that he is related to the House of Han?" Scarlet was the only female in the chamber. She had a voluptuous, sultry figure and a beautiful look, but no man would be interested in her. In fact, most were afraid of her because of the two large, frightening scars that blotted her face. Scarlet cultivated the energy of death and possessed early-stage high god strength. Among those in the chamber, she was neither the weakest nor the strongest. And yet, the Godhunter faction she led had been doing well thanks to her outstanding wits. Upon hearing Scarlet's words, those leaders who had gladly agreed to the plan bunched their brows. Even Chrisen seemed somewhat hesitant to proceed. In a deep voice, he said, "What are the odds? I've never known him to have any family or friends, but if he's associated with the House of Han, we need to reconsider our plan." Quincy's face turned cold, and in an annoyed manner he said, "Indeed. That guy used to be the strongest in Ronson Canyon, but he is not in the canyon anymore. Besides, his followers have clearly indicated that they will no longer interfere with any business in the canyon. Furthermore, he never said that he came from the House of Han, and he is not even in the canyon. What is there to be afraid of?" Yeah, we must be overthinking. There's no way he's related to the House of Han." Chrisen put on an embarrassed smile and said, "We must be scaring ourselves for nothing. The plan stays on course. I'm still in." "That's my man," said Quincy as he chuckled. Shortly after, he looked at Scarlet with impatient eyes and said, "Women are always so faint-hearted. HMPH, if you're not joining us, then you can leave. That's one less piece of the pie to share. We can do just fine without you." Scarlet's face turned dark. She lifted her chin and replied, "Well then, carry on as you wish, but I wouldn't take the risk of offending that guy." Upon finishing those words, Scarlet transformed into a trail of shadow, shot through the waterfall, and left. "Looks like that bitch is in love with him. She should look at herself in the mirror," he snickered. "How could any guy want her?" mocked Quincy disdainfully as Scarlet left. "That guy has no emotions, has never shown any interest in any woman, and he most certainly wouldn't be reluctant to kill a woman. What a fool of Scarlet to fall in love with such a man. But speaking of that whore, her face may be repulsive, but her body. I'd like to take her somewhere that's pitch black," said Chrisen as he moved his pelvis suggestively. The Godhunter leaders joined him in cackling nastily. "How was the meeting, Chief?" Shortly after Scarlet left the cave, a crafty-looking Godhunter welcomed her smilingly. Scarlet was enraged. As a high god, her hearing was impeccable. And given that those in the cave had not lowered their voices, she heard every word of their obscene comments about her. However, Scarlet dared not return to the cave to beat them up because her strength was limited. She had no choice but to repress her anger. He is possibly the only man who isn't so debased. A thought emerged in Scarlet's mind out of nowhere. But she then laughed at herself, thinking, "Oh, Scarlet. What the hell are you thinking? How could he fancy you given the way you look? He only saved you because it was aligned with his interest. He didn't mean anything at all. Stop indulging in flights of fancy already." Chief, what happened?" Scarlet showed a mix of emotions on her face. She would grit her teeth in rage one moment, but try to hold back laughter in the next. That follower of Scarlet's couldn't help but ask in a slightly higher voice. Scarlet was abruptly roused from the daze. She shook her head hard, as though trying to shake off the unrealistic fantasy off her mind. "It's nothing. Right, you've mentioned that guy still has a few followers who have yet to leave the canyon. Can you contact them?" asked Scarlet after calming her mind. "They are sorting out a few remaining businesses and they will all leave soon. I know where they are. I shall contact them right away." "Wait, let me write a scroll. Make sure it reaches them as quickly as possible," said Scarlet. She immediately took out a scroll, wrote a few sentences, handed it to her follower, and hastily left. Somewhere in the Ronson Canyon, where the unbroken mountains looked no different from the surface of the sea, where large, white cotton-like clouds floated gently in the sky. Those traveling in the airship had just left a swamp with a foul atmosphere and were moving towards a ravine piled with rocks. Before anyone could see the situation in the ravine, Sanguis suddenly said, "Someone is approaching us." The House of Hand guards on the airship were jolted. They looked around vigilantly and quickly formed a combat formation on the airship. Emily, Phoebe, and the others were alarmed. They looked everywhere as they shouted, "Everyone be careful. Get ready for battle?" "That is not necessary. She came alone." Sanguis seemed somewhat amused that everyone on the airship was frightened. "Don't worry, that woman isn't particularly strong. I can handle her myself." After hearing Sangui's words, the party let out a sigh of relief. But they were all rather puzzled, not understanding why a woman would approach them all by herself. They did not have any contacts in the Ronson Canyon, and it was not possible for one expert to cause them any harm. What would her intention be? A moment later, Scarlet gradually appeared above a stone forest in the distance. Fanny, Lisa, and the other ladies lightly cried out in shock when they saw the fierce-looking crisscross scar on her face. "Come no further," shouted Bollins coldly as his killing intent locked on Scarlet. Scarlet was stunned. She did not expect that Bollins could deliver such an intense killing intent at her with just one look. Her heart trembled and she thought, the House of Hand doesn't seem as weak as Quincy said, and they have at least one high god. Could they have even stronger experts? Just as Scarlet was about to speak, her long, shapely brows darted and her bewitching eyes widened. She sensed a very strange energy on Bollins, which she had only detected on another man who possessed an even greater strength. They must be related. Scarlet became even more certain of her speculation. She first halted midair, raised her hands to indicate that she came in peace, and hastily asked, "Do any of you know Han Hao?" "Han Hao? Who's Han Hao? No clue." "Who are you? And who is Hao Hao?" The members of the House of Han were astounded, and they looked at Scarlet bewildered. What's the matter with this woman? Why would she come to us so excitedly to ask us this ridiculous question? Scarlet was startled by their response. She thought, have I been overthinking? But the energy on that old guy is very similar to Han Hao's. How do you explain that? We do not know the person you mentioned. Please do not get in our way, said Stratham politely, but almost condescendingly. However, he glanced at Bollins several times with a look on his face that hinted, don't blame us for being impolite if you don't leave. My apologies. I shall leave right away. Having been a god hunter of countless years, Scarlet was excellent at reading body language and understood what they were hinting. She thought, if you aren't related to Han Hao, well, it's none of my business that you are all about to die. Hold on. It was at this moment that Gilbert started scratching his head as though he was trying hard to recall a memory tossed long ago. "I think I've heard that name before. Let me think." The members of the House of Hands stared at Gilbert with puzzled looks. Even Scarlet looked at Gilbert suspiciously. With Bollins not attacking her immediately, she reminded him, Han Hao cultivates the energy of death. He uses a 3-meter bone spear. He has 7. Gilbert's eyes lit up and he finally recalled the long-lost memory. He exclaimed, "It's him!" Emily, Phoebe, Fanny, Lisa, and others had seen Little Skeleton before, although they did not know that he had named himself Han Hao. They immediately knew that Han Hao was Little Skeleton when Scarlet explained that he had 7 bone spurs on his back. "I believe we know the person you are talking about," exclaimed Emily. "Is there something we can help you with? Is Han Hao a member of your House of Han?" asked Scarlet again. Emily thought about it for a moment as she wasn't sure how to answer the question. However, she knew that Han Shu and Little Skeleton were very close, so she replied, "I guess you can say he is." "Then that'll do," Scarlet hastily added. "All the god hunters in the Ronson Canyon have joined forces with the intention to take down your House of Han. I don't think that you can handle so many of them at once. You guys should turn around immediately and leave the Ronson Canyon. Otherwise, if they intercept you, it'll be bad." Emily, Stratham, and the others were taken aback upon hearing those words. Stratham asked, "How would you know that?" "I'm a leader of the god hunters myself, but I came to warn you because I know Han Hao," Scarlet said hastily. "I have sent a messenger to notify Han Hao's followers, but I do not know if they can stop the attack in time." Those guys have eyes everywhere in the Ronson Canyon, and they are very familiar with the terrain here. It's impossible to hide from them as long as you are inside the Ronson Canyon. You need to turn back right away." "We cannot retreat," said Phoebe bitterly. "If they were to turn around, they would likely run into Hoffs, Larrickson, and their troops, and they could not end up worse running into the God Hunters. Thank you for your reminder, but we must cross the Ronson Canyon by hook or by crook. I just hope we can outrun those God Hunters." Then, without wasting another word, without even asking Scarlett's relationship with Han Hao, they hastily continued with their journey. Chapter 885, Ronson Canyon, GDK 885. Ronson Canyon. Crossing the Ronson Canyon from the Darkness Dominion to the Death Dominion would take 10 days. Given that retreating was not an option, the House of Han could only fly through the Ronson Canyon as quickly as possible. Gilbert, Emily, and the others were rather puzzled. They couldn't figure out why that scar-faced lady would know Little Skeleton. They thought that a necromancy creature should always stay in the Netherworld instead of appearing on Elysium. But as they were in a hurry, they couldn't take the time to ask Scarlett about Little Skeleton or Han Hao. In their minds, Little Skeleton remained a small skeletal warrior as they had not seen him for ages. They could never imagine just how influential and powerful Han Hao was now. Scarlett understood their concerns and did not stop them from leaving. After the airship carrying the House of Han swept past her, she hesitated for a moment before she started following the airship secretly. As the leader of one of the major God Hunter factions in the Ronson Canyon, she understood the techniques and strength of the other players in the canyon. As long as the House of Han was within the Ronson Canyon, Quincy and his gang would be able to locate and track them without much trouble. Quincy and the others had been active in the Ronson Canyon for countless years and knew the geography and terrain like the back of their hands. Naturally, they would use the knowledge to their advantage and prevent the House of Han from escaping. 3 days later, when the airship carrying House of Han was flying towards a towering mountain, they discovered that the mountain peak was densely packed with many dark, sinister-looking gods whose eyes were glittering ominously. Those on the mountain peak gathered in multiple groups, and those groups would keep some distance from one another. It was clear that they were of different factions. Those who led those factions put on cruel smiles with greedy lights glinting from their eyes as they stared at the approaching House of Han airship. Some were so excited that they were salivating profusely. It was obvious from their demeanors that they were God Hunters. Before the airship was near, the God Hunters who had been waiting on the mountain for some time took into the air. Their leaders unfolded their domains of divinity, forming layers of barriers to obstruct the airship. The House of Han was forced to stop their airship in front of the layers of barriers. "Oi, you pieces of shit. Get the fuck off our way," cursed Gilbert most impolitely. 10 or so God Hunter factions were blocking in the House of Han's path. Each faction had at least a dozen or so God Hunters. The largest faction present belonged to Quincy, numbering at approximately 300 God Hunters. Altogether, there were around 1,300 God Hunters. Practically all of the faction leaders possessed high god strengths. Against such a powerful alliance of savage gods, the path ahead of the House of Han seemed grim. Quincy seemed as though he had not heard Gilbert's curses. Along with the other faction leaders, Quincy would leer and point at Phoebe, Emily, Fanny, Jasper, Lisa, and other ladies as they made comments about their appearances. They would also make strange, delighted laughter every once in a while. Phoebe, Emily, Jasper, and the others were all outstanding beauties. Han Shuo's rebirth pills had not just made their skins even more sparkling and translucent, but it had also preserved their beauty, keeping their appearances at the most appealing state. All men and women would find them breathtaking. As God Hunters who lived by looting and killing others, these savages loved seeking thrills and excitements. Females were particularly irresistible to these ogres. They found outstanding beauties like Phoebe, Emily, and the others to be so alluring that they had momentarily forgotten their main objective. To Quincy and the other faction leaders, the House of Han guards were nothing to be afraid of. They had discovered no high god expert among the House of Han guards. Therefore, even though the size was considerable, they did not consider the army a threat. "Woo-hoo-hoo, that one is mine. The ripest melon is the tastiest. Take any others, but that one is reserved for me," said Kristen excitedly as he pointed Emily in a lecherous smile. It was as though everything in the House of Han was up for grab. I'm taking that petite one. My favorite type, said Quincy as he pointed at the terrified Lisa. Brothers, look carefully and choose your woman. We are dividing the spoils now. Yum, these are way superior to that scarlet bitch. They not only have perfect bodies, smooth skins, but even their looks are so salivating. Yes, we should divide those ladies first and talk about the other spoils later. Hee hee, today is going to be an exciting day, remarked another faction leader. Ever since relocating to the Elysium, the members of the House of Han had never suffered any insult remotely close to such level. Sanguis, Bollins, and Gilbert's blood seethed to see their matriarchs being insulted. The ladies also wished to slice those faction leaders into a million pieces. However, they understood that they stood no chance against the 10 of so savage high gods and more than 1,000 god hunters. Gilbert and Sanguis, who were rash in temperament, would have charged ahead if Emily had not stopped them with her gazes. Phoebe wore a dark face and said in a cold voice, "We are the City of Shadows House of Han. We have great relations with various major family clans in the Death Dominion. If anything is to happen to us, you will be exterminated by the divine guards from the darkness and Death Dominions. But that doesn't need to happen. If you let us pass safely, we will pay you 5 million black crystal coins." "Ha ha ha, who do you think you are trying to intimidate?" said Quincy after laughing out loud. "Take a good look at us, pretty. We are god hunters. If we are afraid of divine guards, we wouldn't be doing this business already. Let's not waste time talking. These ladies got me itching real hard down there. I can't wait," exclaimed Kristen as he rubbed his hands together excitedly. "Stop!" It was at this moment that Scarlet appeared from the direction that the airship traveled from. She glanced at the aroused god hunters and hastily said, "I have asked, they know Han Hao. You better not touch them." Those faction leaders were stunned by those words. Some of those who were especially afraid of Han Hao immediately showed hesitation as though they wished to retreat. Even Quincy and Kristen's faces jolted. It appeared that even though Han Hao had left the Ronson Canyon, those in the canyon still feared him. "Cut your scaremongering, Scarlet," shouted Quincy angrily. "Who in the right mind would trust their words? Humph, during all the years Han Hao lived in Ronson Canyon, I've never seen him with any family or friends. You can't prove that they are related to Han Hao just because their family name is Han. I have asked. They said that Han Hao is definitely a member of the House of Han," Scarlet warned. "You should know what will happen when Han Hao finds out that someone touched his people. You know what he will do to you. But if any of you have forgotten, let me give you a quick reminder. All those family clans in the Death Dominion that had killed Han Hao's followers have all been exterminated. Every last one of them." Lights flickered from the eyes of those faction leaders after they heard Scarlet's words. It seemed as though Han Hao was so terrifying that Scarlet's words had frightened these faction leaders. "Bitch, shut the fuck up." When Han Hao was still in Ronson Canyon, Quincy and his faction had always been pressed down under Han Hao's power. Now that his strongest rival had left the canyon, Quincy thought that he no longer had his hands tied in the Ronson Canton. By now, he would get annoyed just from hearing Han Hao's name. "It's a trick. They are trying to scare us using Han Hao's name. Don't be fooled. We all know that Han Hao does not have any relatives. Let's get it done already." Quincy continued to tempt the faction leaders. "Look at it. Look at all these pusses and treasures right in front of us. They are ours to take, and we just have to grab it." Perhaps Quincy's explanation worked, or perhaps those god hunters were tempted by the House of Han's beauties and treasures. The faction leaders decided to go on with it. They commanded their followers to surround the airship. With things having come to this, Scarlet knew that no amount of her words could change anything. She let out a helpless sigh and silently withdrew, lest she is killed needlessly. The tension was high, and it seemed that a battle could erupt at any moment. "Hey you people, is someone having a party without me?" A piercing sneer suddenly sounded from the distance. A bulky man whose body was covered with scars came into appearance. He was a cultivator of the energy of destruction. As a late-stage mid-god, his strength was poorer than almost every of the faction leaders. But somehow, all those faction leaders turned grave at the presence of this mid-god. "Hi, kitten. I thought you have all left the canyon," said one of the faction leaders after forcing a smile. Quincy and Kristen seemed unhappy. They bunched their brows while staring at Kitten, who was not supposed to be there. In a dark face, Quincy asked, "Kitten, why aren't you in the fringe with your chief but still here in the Ronson Canyon?" Kitten howled with laughter before he impolitely replied, "Since when did you get to have a say in our business?" After taking a short pause to glance at the House of Han on the airship, Kitten said to the faction leaders, "On the first day I joined my chief, the first thing he instructed us is that we must not attack the members of the House of Han. And the second instruction, we must not allow the House of Han to come under attack. Although I don't understand why my chief would hand us such a strange command, it is not my job to understand it. My duty is to execute my chief's command, and execute I will. Kitten, the rest of your gang have left the Ronson Canyon. Why bother meddling with our business?" Kristen put on a cold smirk and said, "Besides, Han Hao is no longer here and you no longer have any power here. Hee hee, do you want to try to stop all of us all by yourself, Kitten?" A savage light glinted from Kitten's eyes before he said with a fearless smirk, "I have been doing this business for ages. Do you think I wouldn't have expected that? Hee hee, I have informed my brothers about the situation before coming here. They should be on their way to the fringe as we speak. You may kill me and proceed as you wish, but you should know how my chief would react to that." Upon hearing those words, all the faces of these faction leaders jolted. It seemed as though they did not expect that Kitten would have taken this measure. They felt troubled, for they knew that even if they killed Kitten and all of the House of Han, Han Hao would still learn of their doings. After a long silence, one of the faction leaders forced a laugh and said, "Since Han Hao has spoken, I'm not participating in this." He turned to Kitten and said, "When you meet Han Hao, please send him my regards and tell him that I, Anlo, will never stand against him." "Hee hee, will do," replied Kitten. "That I cannot deny Han Hao of this honor. My apologies, Quincy, I'm out." Another faction leader pulled back from the deal. Han Hao had been generous to me while he was in Ronson Canyon. I will never attack his people." One after another, the leaders of the Godhunter factions announced their withdrawal at the last possible moment. Afraid of retribution from Han Hao, they reluctantly turned and left with their followers. Moments later, only Quincy and Kristen and their gang were still blocking in the House of Han's path. There was nothing that they could do as they watched their former partners left. They had cursed Han Hao countless times in their minds. Gilbert, Emily, Fanny, and the other Han family members looked at each other in puzzlement. They had no idea what was happening and why these ferocious gods would be so afraid of little Skeleton. A thought suddenly crossed Balin's mind and he softly exclaimed, "So their leader is him." "Who?" asked Sanguis and Gilbert simultaneously. Balins explained, "Remember that mysterious teenager I've mentioned just then. He leads the most powerful Godhunter faction in Ronson Canyon, but nobody knows of his origin. Unexpectedly, it turns out that it's one of ours." "Yeah, I think you're right," Gilbert remarked. "I've known that little guy to be pretty tough long ago. But truly, I did not expect that he would command such influence in Ronson Canyon." "Quincy, Kristen, do you wish to fight my chief?" Kitten sneered. "You guys better give up now and I will overlook this incident. Otherwise, you know the consequences. Fucking hell, I will take this shit no more." Quincy seemed to have been infuriated by Kitten's words, and he shouted, "If Han Hao is here, I might actually do him this favor. But how dare you puny little fucking midgod try to intimidate me? Outrageous? Fuck this shit. If Han Hao returns to the Ronson Canyon, I will just move elsewhere. Everyone, attack. And kill that bluffing Kitten the first." Kristen, too, was going to retreat. But after taking yet another look at those ladies on the airship, lust got the better of him. He too gestured and commanded his troops, "Attack!" Chapter 886, Fighting Quincy and Kristen, GDK 886. Fighting Quincy and Kristen before Kitten came, around 10 Godhunter factions had formed an alliance to exterminate the House of Han and take all their valuables. Against 10 or so high gods and more than 1,000 mid-gods, the House of Han wouldn't stand a chance. But thanks to Han Hao's fearsome reputation in the Ronson Canyon, most of those godhunters were frightened and chickened out from the robbery. With that, the House of Han guards needs only fight Quincy and Kristen's forces. Quincy and Kristen had brought around 500 godhunters in total, with the two being mid-stage high gods. They were one of the biggest powerhouses in Ronson Canyon. However, the House of Han was not afraid of them. Gilbert and Sanguise could no longer hold their rage. The moment after Quincy and Chrisen commanded their godhunters to attack, they suddenly noticed that the House of Hand guards were changing at them valiantly. Quincy and Chrisen jolted. As masters of skirmishes, they could immediately tell that these House of Hand guards were very unlike the typical divine guards. With that, they hastily yelled, "Y'all better be fucking careful." The House of Hand guards marched at their enemy in a tidy formation. They would move uniformly as though they were a single entity. By keeping a fixed, optimal distance from their fellow comrades, the House of Hand guards were not only able to attack effectively, but they could also look out for one another. Quincy and Chrisen could tell from the staunch faces and ice-cold gazes of those House of Hand guards were experienced and well-trained. They were not novices that had not seen combat like most of the guards possessed by young family clans. Although Quincy and Chrisen recognized that their enemy was nothing ordinary, they had still underestimated the true power of those House of Hand guards. All those years of training in the 8 Desolation and Torment formation were not for naught. Having been repeatedly baptized with blood, these House of Hand guards were even fiercer and more ruthless than the God Hunters. The House of Hand guards were as though an unstoppable sword, and they stabbed straight into the God Hunter's chest. A scene similar to the battle between the House of Hand guards and Ralph's 2nd Corps Divine Guards was reenacted. The House of Hand not only had the upper hand in size, but also in team cooperation. As soon as the two sides clashed, the overwhelming team combat strength of the House of Hand guards possessed became obvious. Those God Hunters who had been devastating the Ronson Canyon were being rapidly decimated. The House of Hand guards advanced through the God Hunters like a glowing hot knife cutting through butter. The God Hunters' defenses were as though a thin sheet of paper that would immediately fall apart to the House of Hand guards' attacks. The God Hunters were heard shrieking in pain and despair before dying. Their chopped-up bodies would fall from the sky and land all around the mountain peak below. Scarlet and Kitten were dumbfounded. When they saw Quincy and Chrisen commanded their troops to attack, they thought that the House of Hand was done for. While Kitten was reflecting and blaming himself for being overly arrogant, he suddenly discovered that the House of Hand guards were already charging and attacking those God Hunters. It was when the two forces clashed that Kitten came to his senses. He was shocked by that mind-blowing team combat strength demonstrated by those House of Hand guards, and finally had some ideas why Han Hao would command his followers to never attack the House of Han. An average person would never be able to learn anything from the complex combat formations practiced by the House of Han guards. But Kitten, as a follower of Han Hao, had also been taught demonic combat formations. With just one look, Kitten recognized that the combat formation used by these House of Han guards were similar to those he and his God Hunters were taught. When Kitten received the note from Scarlet, he was rather skeptical that Han Hao would be related to the House of Han in any way. But after witnessing the attack formation employed by the House of Han guards, he was certain that Scarlet was right. The tremendous team combat strength of the House of Han had shocked Scarlet more than it had shocked Kitten. As she watched the House of Han wrecking Quincy and Chrisen's forces like a giant, efficient meat grinder, she mumbled, "House of Han, Han Hao, they are indeed unfathomable." At this moment, Quincy and Chrisen felt as though they would go insane. Not in their wildest dreams would they have anticipated that these House of Han guards would be so terrifying, that they could so easily reap the lives of their followers using an incredibly complex combat formation. They wished to assist their followers, but were too busy defending themselves from Sanguise, Bollins, and Gilbert. By now, even Quincy and Chrisen believed that Han Hao was related to the House of Han, for they sensed the energy used by Sanguise, Bollins, and Gilbert was vaguely similar to that used by Han Hao. Before the battle broke out, Quincy and Chrisen had discovered no high god in the House of Han, but they received 3 great surprises as soon as the battle began. 3 experts with strengths not even worthy of mentioning had suddenly transformed into formidable demons. Quincy and Chrisen felt remorseful. They were mad at themselves for messing with Han Hao's family when they knew that Han Hao was crafty and full of surprises. "Why aren't you shouting anymore?" "Keep shouting. You were talking lots of shits just then. Old fuck, let me tell you, I'm going to skin you and chop your little flaccid tiny dick off. Fucker, how dare." Unlike Sanguise and Bollins, who were completely quiet, Gilbert had not shut his malicious mouth for even a second, and he just kept spurting abusive words. They were just as fierce as his attacks. Quincy was held up by Sanguis, while Crisson was jointly attacked by Gilbert and Bollins. Bollins would attack Crisson with his flying sword flooded with killing intent, forcing the latter to spend all his attention and energy to defend against Bollins. Meanwhile, Gilbert would fly around Crisson like a ghost and attack him when opportunities presented itself. He would also greet multiple generations of Crisson's female ancestors once through. This psychological torment was no less painful than the injuries on his body. Under the constant cursing and mocking by Gilbert, Crisson felt as though he might collapse at any moment. Unable to concentrate his mind on fighting, Crisson's firepower was greatly reduced. Soon, Bollins found yet another opportunity, and his flying sword opened up a few more gashes on Crisson's skin. "Kill them all," commanded Phoebe coldly upon seeing that the House of Hand guards had overpowered their enemy. Quincy and Crisson had not only looked at Phoebe, Emily, Lisa, and the others with obscene gazes, but they had also verbally abused them. Phoebe had been silently repressing her rage all along. Now that the House of Hands situation had turned from dire to favorable, her attitude immediately changed. Phoebe, Emily, Strathome, Iremike, and the others had been making tremendous cultivation progress on Elysium, where elemental energies were the most intense. In the House of Han, they had access to vast financial resources, scrolls containing profound knowledge of various energies, the pelleted medicines Han Shuo made, and divine essences acquired from various regions. Those resources would keep on appearing in the Han residences, warehouse before they were distributed among these core members of the House of Han. They were the cream of the crop back on the profound continent, a resource-poor material plane. Upon arriving on Elysium, they had been provided with everything that could assist with their cultivation. Combined with their outstanding aptitude, they had been making tremendous progress. Phoebe, Emily, and most others had reached midgodhood, while gifted experts like Strathome and Iremike had entered the late-stage midgod realm. They had been progressing much faster than those who were born and raised on Elysium. These people were able to become top-notch experts in a world where elemental energies were thin and little was known about the fundamental forces. It was only natural that they would make extraordinary progress after moving to Elysium and gaining access to vast resources. Phoebe, Emily, Iremike, Strathome, and the others had not been idle. They too were well practiced in Han Shuo's demonic combat formation and had been massacring Crisson and Quincy's god hunters. The first high god to fall was Crisson. He had finally lost his mind after being subjected to Gilbert's persistent chanting of malicious words. He was so focused on getting Gilbert that he had forgotten that Bollins was still a threat. When Crisson had finally managed to land an attack on Gilbert, Bollins' flying sword entered from the back of his neck and emerged from his forehead. It was an instant kill. "Ha ha, gotcha, fucker. I may not have the firepower of Bollins or Gilbert, but my body is fucking tough. How foolish of you to think that I can be killed in one hit." Gilbert stumbled backward, coughed a few times, and quickly returned normal. He went on to trample Crisson's dead body on the mountain peak. Gilbert's body had been smelted by Han Shuo the same way he smelt demonic weapons. Although Gilbert's body wasn't as ridiculously tough as Han Shuo's, it was still orders of magnitude stronger than that of an average god. If it was another expert who suffered that attack of Crisson, they would be severely injured if not killed. Gilbert, however, could handle it without much trouble. "All right, that's enough, Gilbert. We need to hurry. Let's join forces with Sanguis to kill the other one." Bollins gave the flying sword in his hand a gentle wipe before charging at Quincy. Gilbert spitted a large mouthful of saliva onto Crisson's flattened body. "Fucker, you've got off easy," cursed Gilbert before he turned and also charged at Quincy. Quincy had been rather passive against Sangui's wild attacks. He was also surrounded by the House of Han guards. Whenever he tried to escape, he would be greeted with the ferocious attacks from those guards. Although Quincy possessed formidable strength, the attack simultaneously made by hundreds of midgods was equally powerful. And with Sanguis constantly bombarding him with insane attacks, he was unable to escape. The moment that Crisson died, a shiver traveled through Quincy's heart, for he knew that it would be him soon. And as expected, Bollins and Gilbert went at him with chilling gazes. It was clear that they were going to gang up on him. Quincy became even more despaired. I may die, but I'm not going down alone. I thought Quincy hatefully. As a god hunter, Quincy knew that his life was always at risk. It was clear from his daring attack on the House of Han despite offending Han Hao that he was not afraid of death. The instance that Ballins and Gilbert came to attack him, Quincy knew that this will be his end. Hoping to make his death a little more significant, he decided to commit an equivalent of a kamikaze attack. Everyone gets spread out. He wants to kill as many of us with his death. Keep a distance from him and bombard him to death. Having had centuries of experience fighting all kinds of experts on the profound continent, Strathome had learned to be astute. With just one look at those bloodthirsty eyes, Strathome was able to make out Quincy's intention. Having heard the warning, Ballins, Gilbert, and even Sanguis immediately flew backward to keep a distance from Quincy. "Motherfucker, wanna make your death a little less pitiful, huh? Ain't gonna happen." Gilbert started opening his mouth again and began spitting his auditory poison. Gilbert greeted Quincy's female ancestors, going as far back as when they were still amoeba, with sort of curses bundled with insults. Meanwhile, Sanguis, Ballins, and the House of Han guards would keep bombarding Quincy with all sorts of ranged attacks. Quincy could not be more despaired. When he realized that his chance of making a kamikaze attack had been taken, he was left with no choice but to defend himself against the bombardment in anguish. The bombardment led by Ballins, Sanguis, and Gilbert eventually exhausted Quincy's divine energy. He was killed by a myriad of energies and weapons. It was an incredibly miserable death. There were all sorts of divine weapons stuck on every inch of Quincy's body, and it was hung on midair. After Sanguis made sure that there was no longer a drop of blood left in his body, a group of guards went forward and chopped him up before tossing his body parts everywhere. With Quincy and Chrisen both dead, those few remaining god hunters that had yet to be slaughtered frantically escaped in every direction. They would try to fly towards hills and thick jungles and use every ounce of strength in them to run. Watching Quincy and Chrisen killed had left Kitten and Scarlet utterly shocked. They were startled by the House of Han's performance. Chapter 887, A-List GDK 887. A list Quincy and Chrisen, the two strongest god hunter factions in the Ronson Canyon, had been destroyed. Their deaths meant that those remaining in their faction would soon disband. Those faction leaders who had left earlier would certainly try to recruit them. After this battle, no god hunter in the Ronson Canyon would ever pick a fight with the House of Han. The mountain peak that has pierced through the clouds was covered with bodies. The House of Han guards, wearing cold faces, re-embarked the airship and stood still, ready to be commanded. It was at this moment that Phoebe and Emily turned their attention to Kitten and Scarlet. Emily went to them smilingly and said, "Thank you for your kind assistance. If it wasn't for your reminder and warning, we would have perished on this mountain." "You're welcome. I'm just doing what I ought to do," replied Scarlet courteously. "It's my duty. I'm just following my chief's command," replied Kitten very humbly. It was very unlike how he had talked to Quincy and the others. He even seemed somewhat overcautious. "Is it true that Han Hao has become your chief?" asked Emily with one brow raised. Kitten was rather puzzled, for he couldn't understand why Emily would ask such a question. He stared blankly for a moment before telling her the truth as it was. "Yes, ever since Chief arrived in the Ronson Canyon decades ago, he had led us on countless expeditions around this land. After a few decades, under his leadership, we became the most powerful faction in Ronson Canyon. All those who blocked your way had lost to our chief. If Chief were still in the canyon, Quincy and Chrisen wouldn't have even tried attacking you." Emily put on an astonished face. She understood that a being that was feared by so many god hunter factions must be an extraordinarily powerful expert. She did not expect that the peculiar little skeleton warrior that she used to know could and had evolved to such a level. "That's unbelievable," remarked Lisa. Back when she was still studying in the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force of Profound Continent, she had been assaulted by Little Skeleton. She remembered the bizarre necromancy creature better than anyone. "There's nothing surprising about it. That fella grew very strong long ago. It's just that you people weren't aware of it," said Gilbert proudly. He then grinned mischievously and said, "You weren't together with Master often, and therefore didn't know just how treacherous that little guy is. Back in the dark forest, He looted and plundered with master every day. Gilbert had served Han Shuo for a very long time. Han Shuo did not shy away from the fact that Gilbert was bound to him under a slave contract. Therefore, he understood Han Hao's actual strength and intelligence better than anyone. Then, where is he right now?" asked Phoebe, who wished to learn more about Han Hao. "My chief is currently at the Fringe," replied Kitten immediately. "If that little guy is at the Fringe, then Master must also be there," said Gilbert smilingly. "We need to leave Ronson Canyon now. Other things can wait," interjected Stratham suddenly. He knew that the House of Han was still in danger, and he was constantly worried that Hoffs and Larrickson could catch up to them. With Stratham's reminder, Phoebe and Emily immediately realized that they did not have the time for conversation. They nodded at Stratham, and Phoebe thanked Kitten and Scarlet again. "The House of Han will always remember the favor you did us today. We are in a hurry and cannot stop in the Ronson Canyon. Till we meet again." "Till we meet again," replied Scarlet with a faint smile. She nodded at Kitten and left. Kitten too said farewell and wished them good luck. He left after Scarlet to handle certain matters which would arise following Quincy and Christen's death. After destroying the two major Godhunter factions, and with Han Hao's fearsome reputation, the House of Han did not meet any obstructions in the remainder of their journey. After 10 days, they had finally passed through the Ronson Canyon and stepped into the territory of the Death Dominion. Soon after the airship carrying the House of Han entered the Death Dominion, their pursuers finally caught up. However, Hoffs and Larrickson could only stand and watch because the Divine Guards from multiple major family clans in the Death Dominion were present to escort the House of Han. Hoffs and Larrickson were so angry that they were seething with blood. It did not matter if they had the strength to defeat those Divine Guards escorting them or not. Should they attempt to injure a citizen of the Death Dominion, they would be directly going against the rules set by the Overgod of Darkness and offending two Overgods. Even though Hoffs was the city lord of Hushville City, even though Larrickson was the second most powerful man in the city of Gorging Clouds, they dared not disobey the directives set by the Overgods. They could only stare angrily as the House of Han left with the Death Dominion Divine Guards. After entering the Death Dominion and being received by their harborers, the House of Han was finally out of danger and could heave a sigh of relief. The City of Shadows, the Saint Residence. Wallace the City Lord's face turned darker and darker as he listened to Ralph's mission report. When Ralph had completed his recount, Wallace shouted, "Rubbish! What a useless load of rubbish! Forgive me, City Lord, we have tried our best." Ralph crouched in fear and tried to look for an excuse. "I did not expect Hoffs and Larrickson to have caused the House of Han no casualties. Also, I did not know that their experts, Sanguis and Ballins, were high gods." "Shut up," commanded Wallace. He took a deep breath and gradually calmed himself. Then he said, "It seems the House of Han knows the role I played in this attack. With all of them now in the Death Dominion, there is nothing that I can do to them." My lord, that Brian. He has disappeared for many years now. Perhaps he is already dead. And perhaps we have nothing to worry about," said Ralph haltingly as he took a few quick glances at Wallace. "You think I'm worried about Brian?" Wallace sneered and said, "Brian is indeed a talented young man. Extraordinary for his young age, but I've seen many young men like him. This kind of person, the brighter they shine, the sooner they die. Even if he returns to the City of Shadows, so what? What can he even do to me?" "Then?" asked Ralph cautiously in a confused expression. Wallace let out a soft sigh and rubbed his head as though he was having a headache. "Although I'm not worried about the youngster himself, he is close to the daughter of the Goddess of Destiny. Back then, the Dark Lord had instructed me to treat Brian well. It is these two significant characters that I'm worried about." Ralph was taken aback. To him, the Goddess of Destiny and the Overgod of Darkness were beings way beyond his reach. He had been unaware of the relationship between Han Shuo and the daughter of the Goddess of Destiny, and learning this had shocked him deeply. "Schedule an appointment with Larrickson and Hoffs for me. It's time for us to have a good conversation," instructed Wallace after thinking for a moment. Ralph respectfully dismissed himself to immediately schedule the secret meeting for Wallace. A few days later, Larrickson, Hoffs, and Wallace gathered in Fort Lasberg. They had a meeting at the former Han residence. When Larrickson and Hoffs heard the revelation from Wallace, they had a tremendous headache. They cursed Wallace in their minds. How could you keep such an important detail from us until now? Fuck you. It was at the former Han residence that they started scheming against Han Shuo. But unfortunately for them, as none of the three were aware of Han Shuo's current condition, the discussion did not result in anything meaningful. The three agreed that they would join forces to kill Han Shuo and the House of Han if they ever returned to the Darkness Dominion. After the discussion was over, Larrickson and Hofs left Fort Lasberg. Wallace, however, did not immediately leave. After hearing Larrickson and Hofs recount of their attack on the Han residence, Wallace became greatly interested in those bizarre but deadly demonic formations in the Han residence. Wallace stayed in Fort Lasberg for more than a month in an attempt to study how those seemingly ordinary trees and stone pillars would have such miraculous uses. But unfortunately for Wallace, he had absolutely no grasp of the profound demonic arts. It was comparable to a caveman trying to decipher the workings of a rocket engine without any understanding of thermodynamics. Needless to say, his attempt was totally fruitless. After more than a month, Wallace had no choice but to give up on trying to study the demonic formations. He had his men destroy every bit of the Han residence and the demonic formations. He had also retaken control over Fort Lasberg, and it no longer belonged to the House of Han. Wallace told the public that Hushville City was fully responsible for the attack on Fort Lasberg. He publicly announced that he strongly condemned their actions and would hold those attackers accountable. However, it seemed as though it was just empty talks and Wallace had not taken any action against Hushville City. Some of the City of Shadows citizens who knew the truth denounced Wallace and the House of Saint for their actions. They made it known to everyone that Wallace conspired to force the House of Han out of the City of Shadows, decreasing the overall strength of the city. After returning to the City of Shadows, Ayabashi and Erebus were disheartened to learn what happened to the House of Han. It was clear to the two that Wallace had a hand in it. However, as subordinates of Wallace, there wasn't much that they could do. They would only complain about their exasperation to each other. Andre and Carmelita, however, did not react so calmly after finding out the truth. They had a lengthy quarrel with Wallace in the Saint residence that lasted for days. Even to his own family members, Wallace denied having any role in the attack and shifted all responsibility on Hofs and Larrickson, claiming his own innocence. But Andre and Carmelita were no fools. As core members of the House of Saint, it was easy for them to deduce Wallace's role in the attack by pulling a few strings. But no matter how significant an event, as time went by, it would eventually fade out of memory. Gradually, the citizens of the City of Shadows stopped discussing it. Other than the Celestial Pearl disappearing from the city, everything seemed to have returned to business as usual. But Wallace knew clearly that there was now another invisible barrier between him and Andre, Carmelita, Ayabashi, and Erebus because of Han Shuo and the House of Han. He knew that this barrier would not fade with the passing of time. At the center of the land of chaos, the Omphalos, Han Shuo had no idea what happened in the City of Shadows billions of miles away. He was focused on solving a big challenge put up by Sovereign Tyre, Log, and Wasir. Tyre, Log, and Wasir stated that they would accept Han Shuo to join their ranks as one of the managers of the Omphalos. However, the three sovereigns also stated that they must take the view of the hundreds of thousands of merchants into consideration. As long as most of the merchants would accept having Han Shuo as one of the Omphalos owners, they would immediately hand those sovereign shops that formerly belonged to Salas to Han Shuo. Han Shuo knew what those sovereigns were up to. The three sovereigns were infamous in the fringe. Few, if any, Omphalos merchants would dare offend the three. With the three pulling the strings behind the scene, most of the merchants bowed to their orders and voted against installing Han Shuo as one of the Omphalos owners. Han Shuo had his men conduct a survey. He discovered that just 20% of the merchants agreed to him joining the management board, and all these people were swayed by Asura. A 20% approval rating was far below Tyre, Log, and Wasir's standards, and Asura could only do so much. Han Shuo must still solve the problem himself. Han Shuo then realized that Tyre, Log, and Wasir were not called sovereigns in the fringe for nothing. A great majority of the merchants feared Tyre, Log, and Wasir more than they did Han Shuo, and they dared not disobey the secret orders of the three sovereigns to stand against Han Shuo. Han Shuo spent a few days thinking for a solution inside the Omphalos. Then, he went to a cliff wall outside the Omphalos and left some messages. A day later, a callous-looking man came to the same spot where Han Shuo was. After noting down the message left by Han Shuo, he silently went on his way. 7 days later, inside an enormous cave thousands of miles from the Omphalos, Han Hao received the message from that man. After reading the message, Han Hao thought silently for a moment before calmly instructing one of his followers, "Assemble all my captains." "As you bid, chief." The follower respectfully dismissed himself and brought the company leaders from every region to Han Hao. A few days later, all of Han Hao's captains were assembled in the cave. Han Hao took out a scroll and pinned it on a wall before instructing, "This is a list of Omphalos merchants. Intercept all the goods of those in this list before they can send their supplies into the Omphalos. But remember, you are not to kill them. If you have to, kill 1 or 2 people to intimidate them." Polo put on an astounded expression and asked, "Just looting. Why not kill them?" Han Hao glanced at Polo and replied in an indifferent voice, "If they are all dead, things won't end well." Han Hao did not explain much at all before he impatiently gestured at his captains and said, "Go ahead and do as I say." Polo did not ask any more questions. He nodded and left with his group. The other God Hunter captains also noted down the names from the list and left. Following that, the God Hunters that used to spread out in various regions of the fringe suddenly gathered near the Omphalos and secretly surrounded it. As the Omphalos was just a valley, many of the goods sold there needed to be imported. Even poisons needed sufficient magical beast organs and other raw materials to be produced. There were tons and tons of supplies delivered to the Omphalos every day. Outside the Omphalos, the merchants had their own ways to protect their goods. They would spend an exorbitant amount of resources to hire a large number of guards, or perhaps sought the experts close to the sovereigns to protect their caravans. Even with all these security measures, their caravans were still not 100% safe, and looting still happened from time to time. However, the looting was usually not too rampant, as the fringe dwellers also needed to purchase goods from those merchants in the Omphalos. They knew that if they crossed the line and caused a lack of supplies in the Omphalos, the sovereigns might intervene. But things seemed to have changed. For an entire month, a large number of merchant caravans delivering goods to the Omphalos were looted by an unknown powerhouse. Almost no merchant could get their goods into the Omphalos. In addition, the looters seemed extremely determined. No matter how many guards they hired, or if they were protected by the sovereign's experts, they would still loot the caravans the same. The bandits were neither rude nor ravaging. As long as the victims didn't try to fight, the bandits wouldn't be too violent. But if they tried to resist, the bandits would not show the slightest mercy. After 2 merchant caravans were annihilated, the merchants had all learned to behave. When they ran into those ferocious bandits, they would consider themselves unlucky and hand over all their goods without resistance. The merchants thought that the unknown power must have gone mad because they were too poor, and the rampant looting wouldn't last for too long. Without sufficient resupplies to the Omphalos, it would simply be disastrous to the fringe. But they soon discovered that they were wrong. 1 month passed, then 2 months, then 3 months. Yet, the unknown power was still present in every region that the merchant caravans had to take to enter the Omphalos, disrupting the order in the fringe. After a while, they noticed a commonality. None of those merchants that supported Han Shuo's installment in the Omphalos had their caravans raided. Chapter 888, Fight Me If You Dare. GDK 888. Fight me if you dare. The Omphalos merchants were no fools. Although they had no idea who those bandits were, they could tell that Han Shuo must have something to do with it. The merchants had been waiting for the 3 sovereigns to take action. But even after waiting for a long time, the 3 sovereigns still seemed to have done nothing. With all their goods stuck outside the Omphalos and their sales taking a nosedive, they had no choice but to gather and initiate contact with the 3 sovereigns. Tyre, Log, and Wasir knew that it was Han Hao who had been rampantly looting those merchant caravans outside the Omphalos. The 3 sovereigns commanded great forces with influence over every region of the fringe. They were informed about this significant activity of Han Hao's soon after he started looting. However, the 3 sovereigns also knew that Han Hao and Han Shuo were closely related. Not wishing to fall out with Han Shu so soon, they remained silent to see just how long Han Hao could keep it up. But even after such a long time, with Han Hao still showing no sign of stopping anytime soon, and with the daily operations in the Omphalos grinding to a halt, the three sovereigns finally ran out of patience. With nearly all the merchants of the Omphalos issuing a joint statement to the three sovereigns, they had no choice but to take action. They responded by telling the merchants not to be anxious and that they will resolve the issue soon. Inside the celestial pearl of the Omphalos, Han Shu was meditating inside a secluded gymnasium. He felt as though he had fused with the Omphalos, as though he had wrapped the entire space with his mind. Ever since stepping into the Skybreak realm, whenever Han Shu had free time, he would use it for meditation. Back then, the moment he broke into the Skybreak realm, he was enlightened with all kinds of profound information, including the true essence of demonic arts and various demonic techniques. By carefully understanding this information, Han Shu could unleash his energy to their greatest potential. The further one progressed in demonic arts, the harder it would be to make further progress. It would take a long time to accumulate and condense demonic yuan for progressing to the next level. One who did not possess sufficient talent might even never be able to break through to the next level. Even an extraordinarily gifted cultivator would take hundreds, if not thousands of years. Han Shu had no idea how long his journey to the next realm will be, or if he will ever reach there. But he knew that he could only reach there one step at a time. All that Han Shu could do now was to stabilize the new realm state as much as possible and familiarize himself with the new demonic concepts and techniques. With everything that needed to be instructed, with his schemes set in motion, all that Han Shuo needed to do now was wait. But Han Shuo wasn't going to do nothing during that time. He used the free time to cultivate as he always does. One day, while calmly deciphering a profound demonic idea of the Skybreak realm, Han Shuo suddenly sensed that an extremely strong life force was slowly moving towards the Celestial Pearl Pharmacy. After Han Shuo reached the Skybreak realm, no living thing could escape from the frighteningly sensitive senses of his consciousness, except for an existence of much greater strength than Han Shuo's. With just a pulsation of his consciousness, Han Shuo figured out that the mighty existence approaching was Sovereign Asura. Back then, when they first met in a pavilion at the Omphalos, as Han Shuo had yet to attain Skybreak realm, he could not clearly detect the energy Asura concealed. But now, Han Shuo could sense Asura's presence from miles away. Han Shuo opened his eyes and walked out from his secluded gymnasium unhurriedly. He flew to the highest clock tower in the Celestial Pearl and waited for Asura. Moments later, Asura, who also sensed Han Shu's aura, appeared before Han Shu smilingly. Tyre, Log, and Wasir are inviting you to a meeting. Haha, it seems that they are finally going to discuss what's happening outside the Omphalos, said Asura most straightforwardly. It was obvious that Asura had figured out that Han Shu was behind the rampant looting outside the Omphalos. Han Shu nodded and replied, "Hee, the three of them are really quite patient to have waited so long before looking for me. You need to be careful, Brian. It's possible that Tyre, Log, and Wasir intend to join hands and attack you," warned Asura with his brows creased. "They are not known for playing by the rules. If they were to join hands and attack you, you will be in great danger." "Don't worry about it, I can handle it," replied Han Shu smilingly. He did not take Asura's warning seriously. Han Shu was able to easily escape from Sala's before he had advanced to the Skybreak realm. With his strength now, Han Shu was confident that he could escape from the three sovereigns with ease. Therefore, he wasn't worried about it at all. "Well then, I will show you the way," said Asura before leading Han Shu to the meeting place. The meeting location that Tyre, Log, and Wasir selected were not the Omphalos.